everyone, and welcome to this deep dive into Mel Robbins's 5-second rule. We're going to be really unpacking this tool and
Simple tool.
yeah, and seeing how it can apply to so many different parts of your life. From procrastination to making difficult decisions. We're going to explore the psychology behind it and some of the fascinating real-life examples that Mel Robbins shares.
What's really interesting about this rule is that it's not just some kind of motivational fluff. It's actually grounded in real neuroscience. And at its core, it's about interrupting those automatic thought patterns
Oh, yeah.
that often hold us back.
It's like hitting the pause button on your inner critic. I think we all have that voice in our heads that just, loves to second guess us and overthink everything.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And what the 5-second rule does is it activates your prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
the part of your brain that's responsible for decision-making and action. It helps you shift from a state of hesitation to a state of action.
So it's like tricking your brain into taking charge before the inner critic can even chime in.
Precisely. And, Mel Robbins' own story is a great example of this in action. The rule was born out of her own struggles. She was going through a lot of difficult times in her career and her personal life. And even getting out of bed in the morning felt like a monumental task.
Oh, I've been there. So what was her aha moment? How did she go from, hitting the snooze button to developing this life-changing rule?
So believe it or not, her inspiration came from a very unlikely source, a rocket launch.
What?
Yeah, she's watching TV one evening, and she saw a rocket preparing for takeoffs. The countdown, the energy, the sheer power of it all sparked something in her.
Wait a minute. So she saw a rocket launch and thought, I'm going to launch myself out of bed?
Well, it might sound strange, but it actually makes sense when you think about it. Rockets don't wait for the perfect moment or for all systems to be go. They launch regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah.
And Mel connected that to the feeling she desperately wanted, that feeling of taking charge and moving forward.
I love that analogy. So how does this actually work in practice? Give us the step-by-step breakdown of the 5-second rule.
Okay, so it's actually surprisingly simple. When you find yourself hesitating on something you should do, start counting backwards from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But here's the crucial part. At 1 now, you have to physically move.
So it's not just a mental exercise. You have to actually pair it with a physical action.
Exactly. That physical movement, even if it's something small, like standing up to taking a step forward,
Yeah.
is what breaks that hesitation pattern and gets you into action mode.
So like you're signaling to your brain, like, okay, we're doing this.
Exactly.
But how does this simple act of, counting backwards and moving
Yeah.
actually lead to lasting change?
But it all comes down to rewiring those ingrained thought patterns.
Okay.
Our brains are wired for efficiency, so they love to rely on those familiar neural pathways, even if they're not serving us well. The 5-second rule disrupts those automatic responses and creates new pathways leading to new behaviors.
Okay, so I know Mel Robbins used this rule to make some pretty big changes in her own life. She was very open about her struggles with things like anxiety and procrastination. So does she use the 5-second rule for those things too?
She did. And her story is actually a very powerful example of how this rule can be used to overcome some really challenging obstacles. She used it for everything from getting up earlier to improving her marriage, but she also applied it to her mental health. And the source material talks a lot about how she used the rule to interrupt those negative thought spirals and retrain her brain to focus on the positive.
That's so inspiring. It gives me hope that even those deep-seated patterns can be changed. But let's back up for a second. Can you elaborate on what you mean by push moments?
Oh, sure, yeah. These are those moments when you know what you should do, but you hesitate. It could be something as simple as choosing to go for a run instead of watching TV. Or it could be something as big as speaking up in a meeting or making a career change.
We've all been there, Rice. But how can listeners identify those moments and make sure they're different from situations where caution is actually warranted?
That's a great question. It's really about learning to tune into your intuition, what feels like a gentle nudge from your inner wisdom, urging you to step outside your comfort zone, and what feels like a genuine warning sign, telling you to proceed with caution.
So it's about discerning between fear-based hesitation and that inner voice that's guiding us towards growth and fulfillment.
Exactly. And the 5-second rule can be a really valuable tool for navigating those moments. It can help you push past the fear and take those leaps of faith that lead to a more fulfilling life.
Okay, so we've talked about how the rule can help us change habits and make those tough decisions. But I'm curious, how does it actually play out in those push moments? Can you share some examples from the book of how people have used the 5-second rule To summon their everyday courage.
Absolutely. The book is filled with inspiring stories of people who use the rule to push past their comfort zones and achieve some incredible things. For example, there's the story of Jose, who was terrified to ask for a raise, but he used the 5-second rule to overcome his fear and walk into his boss's office with confidence.
Wow, that takes guts. Did he get the raise?
He did. And not only that, but he also gained a newfound sense of self-respect and confidence. That extended far beyond that one interaction.
It's like that one act of courage had a ripple effect on his whole life.
Exactly. And then there's Bryce, a 15-year-old who dreamed of publishing a cookbook. He was really intimidated by the process, but he used the 5-second rule to overcome his doubts and just start writing.
Wow, 15 years old and already publishing a cookbook. That's amazing. What does that tell us about the power of this rule?
Well, it shows that the 5-second rule isn't just for adults facing big life decisions. It's a tool that anyone can use to overcome those moments of self-doubt
Yeah.
and achieve their goals no matter how big or small.
I love that. It's really about empowering ourselves to take action and create the life we want. Okay, but let's talk about procrastination for a second. I think this is something that pretty much all of us can relate to. Can you explain how procrastination is often linked to stress and how the 5-second rule can help us break free from that cycle?
Absolutely. The source material goes into this in detail. And it's fascinating. You see, procrastination isn't always about laziness or poor time management. It's often a coping mechanism for dealing with stress and uncomfortable emotions.
So it's like we're using procrastination as a temporary escape hatch from those feelings of pressure or overwhelm.
Exactly. And, in the short term, it might feel good to avoid those tasks, but in the long run, it actually creates more stress and anxiety.
It's like a vicious cycle. We procrastinate to avoid stress, but the procrastination itself creates more stress. So how do we break free from that pattern?
Well, the first step is to identify the real source of the stress. That's driving the procrastination. What are you actually trying to avoid? Once you've pinpointed that, the 5-second rule can help you push past the resistance and take action.
So it's about acknowledging those difficult emotions, but not letting them dictate our actions.
Exactly. And the book provides a great example of this in action. Remember Scott, who was struggling with procrastination in grad school? He was feeling totally overwhelmed by the pressure and kept putting off his assignment.
Oh, I can relate to that. Grad school is no joke. So how did Scott use the 5-second rule to turn things around?
So he realized that his procrastination stemmed from a fear of failure. He was so afraid of not living up to his own expectations that he was basically paralyzing himself with inaction.
That makes sense. Fear can be such a powerful motivator, but it can also be incredibly debilitating. So how did he use the 5-second rule to overcome that fear?
So he started using the countdown every time he felt the urge to procrastinate. It helped him interrupt that negative thought pattern and shift his focus to the task at hand. He also started visualizing himself successfully completing his assignments, which gave him a boost of motivation and confidence.
So it's about replacing those fear-based thoughts with positive, empowering ones?
Exactly. And the results were amazing. Scott went from feeling totally overwhelmed and paralyzed to feeling in control and motivated. He was able to complete his assignments on time and even started to enjoy the learning process again.
That's such a powerful example of how the 5-second rule can help us reframe our thinking and achieve our goals. But what about those times when it's not a task we're avoiding, but our own thoughts? Like when we're stuck in a worry spiral or negative self-talk starts to take over. Can the 5-second rule help with that too?
It absolutely can. Remember, Mel Robbins herself struggled with anxiety for years. She even took medication to manage her panic attacks. But she realized that worrying and negative self-talk were habits that could be broken just like any other habit.
So instead of feeling like we're at the mercy of those thoughts, we can actually retrain our brains to think differently.
Exactly. And it's incredibly empowering.
But how does the 5-second rule fit into that process?
It's a key part of a 3-step technique Mel Robbins developed for overcoming anxiety. The first step, as you might have guessed, is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown. When you feel that anxiety creeping in, use the countdown to interrupt the worry spiral.
So it's like hitting the pause button on that negative thought loop.
Exactly. It's about creating a mental break
Yeah.
and shifting your focus away from the source of the anxiety. But it's not enough to just stop the negative thoughts. We need to replace them with something more positive and empowering. That's where the second step comes in, asking yourself, what am I grateful for?
This is so powerful because it forces us to shift our perspective right. Instead of dwelling on what's wrong, we're actively choosing to focus on what's right. But I have to admit, when I'm feeling anxious, gratitude is probably the last thing on my mind. How can we make this practice more accessible when we're in the midst of those overwhelming feelings?
That's a common struggle. It's important to remember that practicing gratitude isn't about denying the difficult emotions. It's about consciously choosing to focus on the good. Even when things feel hard, start small. Even just one thing, like a warm cup of coffee or a sunny day, can shift your energy. The key is consistency. The more you practice, the easier it becomes.
That makes sense. It's like building a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger it gets. And what's the third step in this process?
The third step is to create what Mel Robbins calls anchor thoughts. These are positive statements that you can repeat to yourself to counteract the negative self-talk.
So it's like giving your brain a new script to follow. Instead of replaying those same old negative tapes, you're choosing to focus on thoughts that are uplifting and empowering. Can you give us an example of an anchor thought?
Absolutely. So let's say you're feeling insecure about a presentation you have to give. Your anchor thought might be something like, I am prepared and confident. I have valuable insights to share.
I love that. And by repeating that statement over and over again, you start to internalize it and believe it right. It's like reprogramming your subconscious mind.
Exactly. And the book highlights a great example of this in action. Mel Robbins used anchor thoughts to overcome her fear of flying. Instead of letting her anxiety spiral out of control, she used the 5-second rule to interrupt the pattern, and then focused on anchor thoughts like, flying is statistically safer than driving, and I am in control of my thoughts and feelings.
Wow, that's incredible. It shows that even deep-seated fears can be overcome with the right tools and techniques. But how did she apply the 5-second rule in that situation? Did she count down every time she felt a panic attack coming on?
She did. Every time she felt that familiar wave of anxiety, she would start the countdown, and then immediately shift her focus to her anchor thoughts. It helped her to break free from that fear-based pattern and create a new neural pathway based on calmness and confidence. And the results were remarkable. She was able to fly without experiencing those debilitating panic attacks.
That's such a powerful example of how the 5-second rule can be used to rewire our brains and overcome even our most challenging fears.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our thoughts and create the reality we want to experience.
That's a great segue into the next topic I want to explore, passion. So we've talked about how the 5-second rule can help us change our behaviors and overcome our fears. But how can it help us connect with our passions and pursue them with purpose?
That's a great question. And the source material is full of inspiring stories of people using the 5-second rule to unlock their passions and pursue their dreams. But before we dive into those stories, I want to highlight something really crucial. Finding your passion isn't about sitting around waiting for inspiration to strike. It's about actively exploring, experimenting, being open to new experiences.
So it's more about doing than thinking.
Exactly. It's about taking action. And that's where the 5-second rule comes in. It's the perfect tool for pushing past that fear and uncertainty. That often holds us back from pursuing our passions.
So instead of saying, I wish I could, or maybe someday, you're saying 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm doing this.
Exactly. It's about seizing those moments of inspiration and turning them into action. Remember Ken, who used the rule to step outside his comfort zone and network at a conference? He ended up connecting with some amazing people in his field.
It's amazing how one small act of courage can open up so many possibilities. And speaking of possibilities, the source material also talks a lot about paying attention to envy. Why is that important?
Well, envy can actually be a valuable guidepost. You see, it often points us towards things that we secretly desire, but are afraid to pursue. So if you find yourself feeling envious of someone else's success, ask yourself, what is it about their journey that resonates with me? What am I longing for in my own life?
That's such a powerful reframe. Instead of letting envy consume you, you use it as fuel for your own journey. But how can we use the 5-second rule to translate that envy into action?
Well, it's about recognizing those moments when you feel that pang of envy and using the countdown to push past the fear and take a step towards what you desire. Remember Matthew, who used the rule to make those daunting cold calls to high-level executives. He was scared, but he pushed past the fear and ended up landing some incredible clients. His story and so many others in the book highlight that we often overestimate the risks and underestimate our own abilities.
It's like that old saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly. And Alan's experience at that PGA Tour event is another great example. He used the rule to overcome his hesitation and ended up networking with a bunch of people he wouldn't have otherwise met. It's all about recognizing those push moments and using the 5-second rule to break through the resistance.
So it's about silencing that inner critic and letting your curiosity and passion guide you. I love that. It's about saying yes to those opportunities that light you up, even if they scare you a little. But how can we cultivate that sense of curiosity and passion when it feels like we've lost touch with those things? Life can get so busy and overwhelming that sometimes it feels like we're just going through the motions.
That's such an important point. Reconnecting with your passions often requires creating space for exploration and reflection. Carve out some time for activities that bring you joy, even if it's just for a few minutes each day. And pay attention to those moments when you feel a spark of excitement or curiosity. Those are clues to what truly lights you up.
So it's about being mindful of our inner landscape
Mhm.
and noticing those subtle shifts in our energy.
Exactly. And the more you pay attention to those subtle cues, the easier it becomes to identify those passions that are waiting to be ignited. But even when we know what we're passionate about, it can be hard to take that first step.
Hmm.
Fear, self-doubt, the busyness of life can easily get in the way. That's where the 5-second rule comes in. It can be that bridge between knowing what you want and actually taking action to make it happen.
So it's about closing that gap between intention and action. Okay, but I think there's another piece of the puzzle that's essential for living a truly fulfilling life, and that's relationships. How can the 5-second rule help us create deeper, more meaningful connections with the people we care about?
That's a great question.
Hmm.
And the source material has some incredibly moving examples of how people are using the 5-second rule to enrich their relationships. But before we dive into those stories, I want to highlight one simple yet profound piece of advice that I think can transform any relationship.
What's it? See,
Say whatever it is that you've been holding back. The compliment, the apology, the expression of love, the difficult conversation. Don't let fear or uncertainty keep you from expressing what truly matters. The book tells a great story about a man named Don who decided to live by the rule of leaving nothing important unsaid. He realized that he had been holding back from expressing his love and admiration for his daughter, and it was creating a distance between them.
oh, wow, I can relate to that. It's so easy to let those unspoken words build up over time. But
Mhm.
why do we do that? Why is it so hard to express those deep feelings sometimes?
Often it boiled down to fear. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of rocking the boat. But what Don realized was that those fears were actually keeping him from experiencing the depth of connection he craved.
So he decided to face those fears head on. How did he use the 5-second rule in this situation?
So he created his own version of the rule. He actually called it his 5-second rule. And he decided that whenever he felt the urge to express something important, he would count down from 5 and then just say it.
I love that. And what happened? Did he tell his daughter how he felt?
He did. He took a deep breath, counted down from 5, and told her how proud he was of her and how much he admired her life choices. And you know what? It transformed their relationship. They became closer than ever before.
That's so beautiful. It's a powerful reminder that vulnerability is the key to intimacy. But it's not just about expressing positive emotions either, right? Sometimes the most important things to say are the difficult things, like apologies or forgiveness, or even setting boundaries.
Absolutely. And the 5-second rule can be a valuable tool in those situations as well. Remember Courtney, who used the rule to finally reach out to her father after years of estrangement? She was terrified to make that call, but she pushed past the fear and did it anyway.
That takes incredible courage. And what happened? Did they reconcile?
It wasn't easy, but
Yeah.
yes, they were able to start rebuilding the relationship. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about finding a way to move forward together.
That's so inspiring. It shows that even the most broken relationships can be healed with courage and vulnerability.
Exactly. And sometimes the most important relationship to work on is the one we have with ourselves. Remember Bill, who felt like he had lost connection with his authentic self? He used the 5-second rule to start living with more intention and integrity. He started making those small, everyday choices that aligned with his values, and it made a huge difference in how he felt about himself.
That's such an important point. Self-love and self-acceptance are the foundation for all other relationships. And sometimes the most courageous act is simply choosing to show up for ourselves, even when we don't feel like it.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what Tracy, the stay-at-home mom, did. She used the rule to push herself to do things that made her feel more alive and confident, like speaking up at church or posting a photo of herself online. These might seem like small things,
Yeah.
but they're huge steps for her, and they helped her reclaim her sense of self.
I love that. It's about recognizing those small acts of self-care and self-expression that nourish our souls and help us connect with our true selves. But sometimes it feels like there just aren't enough hours in the day for self-care. How can we prioritize those things when we're already feeling overwhelmed?
Well, it's about making a conscious choice to put ourselves on the priority list. It doesn't have to be anything grand or time-consuming. Even just 5 minutes of meditation or a walk in nature can make a world of difference. And the 5-second rule can be that gentle nudge we need to make it happen.
So it's about those small, everyday choices that reflect the love and respect we have for ourselves.
Exactly. And Crystal, the engineer at Cisco, is a great example of this. She used the rule to stop second-guessing herself
Mm.
and start taking more risks. She started sitting next to people she didn't know at conferences,
Mm.
asking questions in meetings, and even asking a VP for a business card.
I love her story. She sounds like she really blossomed.
She did. And it all started with those small acts of courage. That helped her build confidence and connect with her authentic self. And Nobuo's story is another powerful example. He used the rule to reclaim his energy and motivation after losing his job. He started pushing himself to do things that made him feel alive, and it made a world of difference in his outlook.
It's amazing how much power we have to change our lives when we choose to take control and act on our instincts.
It is, and the 5-second rule is the perfect tool for unlocking that power.
So to recap, the 5-second rule isn't just about getting things done. It's about showing up for ourselves, for our passions, and for the people who matter most. It's
Yeah.
about creating a life that feels authentic, meaningful, and fulfilling.
Exactly. It's about realizing that you have the power to change anything in your life, one 5-second decision at a time.
I love that. And that brings us to the heart of the matter. What does it truly mean to live a great life? You know, the source material touches on some really profound concepts about courage and passion and fulfillment. And I'm curious to get your take on this. What makes a life truly great, in your opinion?
That's such a great question. And it's something that I think we all grapple with on some level. Yeah, the book doesn't define greatness in terms of external achievements or societal standards. Instead, it focuses on something much more personal and profound. The courage to honor your instincts, to pursue what truly matters to you, and to live a life that feels aligned with your values.
It's about being true to yourself even when it's hard. It's about pushing past the fear and uncertainty and taking those leaps of faith that lead to a more fulfilling life.
Exactly. Remember the story of Paulo Coelho, the author of The Alchemist? His book was initially a flop. His publisher even dropped him. But he never gave up on his vision. He kept writing, he kept believing in his work, and eventually his book became a global phenomenon.
That's incredible. It's a great reminder that success doesn't always happen overnight. It takes persistence and resilience and a deep belief in yourself.
And courage. It takes courage to keep going when everyone else doubts you, when you doubt yourself. Remember what Coelho said, "I was following my personal legend, and my treasure was my capacity to write. His passion and his courage to pursue it led him to create something truly extraordinary."
It's a powerful example of how our passions can lead us to our greatest treasures, even if the path isn't always easy. But how can we stay committed to that path when the going gets tough? What role does the 5-second rule play in navigating those challenges?
Well, the 5-second rule can be that anchor that keeps us grounded when the storms of doubt and fear arise. It's about recognizing those moments of self-doubt and fear and using the countdown to push through them.
So it's about silencing that inner critic
Right.
and letting our instincts and passions guide us. But what about those times when it feels like we're moving in the wrong direction? How can we course correct when we've veered off course from our passions and purpose?
That's a great question. And it's something that we all experience from time to time. The key is to be willing to pause, reflect, and reassess. Ask yourself what's no longer serving me, what needs to change, and then use the 5-second rule to take those first steps towards realignment.
So it's about having the courage to make adjustments and course correct when needed.
Exactly. Remember Dan, who was hesitant to go back to school at 44? The thought of being the oldest freshman in his classes was intimidating. But he used the 5-second rule to overcome his fear and register for classes. He realized that it was never too late to pursue his dreams.
His story is so inspiring. It shows that age is just a number and that we have the power to create the life we want at any stage.
And Shirley's story is another great example. After losing her husband, she felt lost and stuck. But she used the 5-second rule to start living again one small step at a time. She started walking again, which led to her feeling more energized and connected to life. It's a beautiful reminder that even in the face of grief and loss, we can choose to move forward and create a new chapter for ourselves.
It's about choosing to embrace life even when it's hard. But how do we find that strength and resilience when we're feeling broken and lost? Where does the 5-second rule fit into that process of healing and rebuilding?
Well, the 5-second rule can be a powerful tool for reclaiming our agency and taking those first steps towards healing. It's about choosing to focus on what we can control, even when everything else feels out of control. It's about taking those small actions that remind us of our strength and resilience. even when we don't feel strong or resilient.
So it's about those small wins that build up over time and create a sense of momentum.
Exactly. And Julie, the woman who raised money for pancreatic cancer research, is another powerful example of how the 5-second rule can help us make a difference in the world. She used the rule to make those difficult phone calls and ask for donations. And she ended up raising thousands of dollars for a cause she cared deeply about.
It's amazing how one person's courage can have such a ripple effect.
And Pulkett's story is another great example of how the 5-second rule can help us live a more fulfilling life. He used the rule to push himself outside his comfort zone and try new things, and it led to incredible personal growth and a deeper sense of purpose.
It's all about taking those small steps, one 5-second decision at a time. It's about choosing to live with intention and courage, even when it's scary.
Remember Kathleen, who used the rule to resist the temptation to drink after a stressful week? That one act of self-control was a huge victory for her, and it reinforced her commitment to living a healthier, more fulfilling life.
It's about those small wins that build up over time and create lasting change.
Exactly. And Kelly, who decided to move to France after years of dreaming about it, is another amazing example of how the 5-second rule can help us manifest our dreams. She finally decided to take the leap. And the fear that had been holding her back simply vanished.
It's like once you make the decision, the universe conspires to make it happen.
It does. And Steve's story, the man who was struggling with PTSD and thoughts of suicide, is perhaps the most powerful example of all. He used the 5-second rule to reach out for help in his darkest moment, and it saved his life.
His story is such a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose hope and reach out for support.
And James, Steve's brother, used the 5-chana.
Welcome back. So in the last part of our deep dive, we talked about how the 5-second rule can help us break free from procrastination, tap into our courage, and even reconnect with our passions. But as we journey through life, facing new challenges and opportunities, how can we make sure that the 5-second rule remains a potent tool in our arsenal?
Well, what's really fascinating is that the 5-second rule isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a framework that can be adapted to a wide range of situations. And as we grow and evolve, so too can our approach to the rule. The key lies in understanding the underlying principles and being willing to experiment with different applications.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like any tool. The more we understand how it works, the more effectively we can use it. But how can we make sure that we're not just relying on the rule as a crutch or a quick fix, but truly integrating it into our lives in a meaningful way?
Well, the source material emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and intention. It's not about mindlessly counting down every time we face a challenge. It's about cultivating a deep awareness of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and then using the 5-second rule as a catalyst for positive change.
So it's not just about reacting to situations, but about proactively shaping our lives.
Exactly. It's about making conscious choices that align with our values and aspirations. And as we practice using the rule in different contexts, we start to develop a deeper understanding of its nuances and its potential.
That's a great point. Practice makes perfect, right? But I'm curious to hear more about those practical applications. We've covered a lot of ground already, but I'm sure there are even more ways we can use this rule to enhance our lives.
Oh, absolutely. The book goes into a wide range of examples, from improving communication to boosting productivity to even overcoming creative blocks. For instance, let's talk about decision-making for a second. We're bombarded with choices every day, big and small. And it can be really overwhelming to navigate all those decisions effectively.
Especially in today's world, where we have access to so much information and so many options, it can feel paralyzing at times. So how can the 5-second rule help us cut through the noise and make those decisions with more clarity and confidence?
Well, the 5-second rule can be a really powerful tool for overcoming decision fatigue and tapping into our intuition. When we find ourselves stuck in a cycle of overthinking and second-guessing, the countdown can help us break free from that mental paralysis and trust our gut instincts.
So it's about silencing that inner critic and tuning into that inner voice that already knows the answer.
Exactly. And the book highlights a fascinating example of this in action. Remember Sarah, who was struggling to decide whether to accept a new job offer? She had a list of pros and cons. She had talked to everyone she knew, but she just couldn't seem to make up her mind.
Oh, I've been there. It's like your head and your heart are at war with each other. So how did Sarah use the 5-second rule to break through that indecision?
Well, she realized that all the overthinking was actually creating more confusion and anxiety. So she decided to try a different approach. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and started counting backwards from 5. At 1, she asked herself, what does my gut tell me to do?
And what happened? Did she get a clear answer?
She did. In that moment of stillness, she felt a sense of peace and clarity. She realized that her heart was pulling her towards new opportunity, even though her head was filled with doubts and fears.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like the countdown helped her to quiet the noise of her mind and access that deeper wisdom that was already there.
Exactly. And the results were incredible. Sarah accepted the job offer, and it turned out to be an amazing opportunity for growth and fulfillment.
That's a great example of how the 5-second rule can help us tap into our intuition and make those tough decisions with more confidence. Okay, but what about communication? How can we use the rule to improve our communication skills, both in our personal and professional lives?
That's another area where the 5-second rule can be incredibly valuable, whether it's expressing our needs, setting boundaries, or having those difficult conversations. The countdown can help us overcome the fear and hesitation that often prevent us from communicating effectively.
We touched on this a bit in the last part when we were talking about relationships, but I'm curious to delve a little deeper into the specific ways that we can use the rule to enhance our communication. What insights does the book offer in this area?
Well, the source material actually provides a framework for using the 5-second rule to cultivate more authentic and effective communication. And one key principle is to focus on clarity and intention. So before engaging in a conversation, take a moment to get clear about what you want to communicate and why. What message do you want to convey? What outcome do you hope to achieve?
So it's about being intentional and purposeful with our words, rather than just reacting in the moment.
Exactly. And once you're clear about your intention, the 5-second rule can help you push past any fear or hesitation and speak your truth with confidence.
Can you give us an example of how this might play out in a real-life situation?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you need to have a difficult conversation with a coworker who has been consistently missing deadlines. You've been putting it off because you're worried about confrontation, but you know it's important to address the issue.
Oof, I can relate to that. Those conversations are never easy. So how would you use the 5-second rule in this situation?
Well, first take a moment to get clear about your intention. What outcome do you hope to achieve? Do you want to simply express your concerns and make sure that the deadlines are met in the future? Or do you need to set firmer boundaries and consequences?
That's a great point. It's important to know what you want to achieve before you even start the conversation.
Exactly. And once you're clear about your intention, use the 5-second rule to overcome any hesitation and initiate the conversation when you feel that urge to avoid the conversation or to sugarcoat your message. Start counting down from 5. At 1 bill, take a deep breath and start speaking.
So it's like using the countdown as a springboard for action. It's about pushing past that initial resistance and just starting the conversation, even if it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. And the beauty of the 5-second rule is that it can be used in any communication scenario, whether it's expressing your appreciation for someone, asking for help, or setting boundaries in a relationship.
It's a versatile tool that can help us navigate those challenging interpersonal dynamics with more grace and ease. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about productivity. In today's fast-paced world, it feels like we're constantly being pulled in a million different directions. So how can the 5-second rule help us stay focused, motivated, and productive, even when we're feeling overwhelmed?
That's a question that a lot of us struggle with. The 5-second rule can be a powerful antidote to procrastination and distraction. It can help us break down those big, overwhelming tasks into smaller, more manageable steps, and then motivate us to take action even when we don't feel like it.
That's a great point. Sometimes just getting started is the hardest part. Once we take that first step, it often creates momentum, and the rest becomes easier.
Exactly. And the book highlights a really brilliant technique for this. It's called the 5-second reset. And it's all about reclaiming control when you feel yourself getting distracted or off track.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this 5-second reset. How does it work?
It's incredibly simple yet effective. When you notice your mind wandering, or your attention drifting away from the task at hand, just start counting backwards from 5. At 1 set, take a deep breath and refocus your attention on what you're supposed to be doing.
It's like hitting the reset button on your brain, bringing yourself back to the present moment and the task at hand.
Exactly. And it's amazing how effective this simple technique can be. It helps to interrupt those distracting thoughts and behaviors and redirect your energy towards what's truly important.
That's a great tip. I'm definitely going to try that the next time I find myself getting sidetracked. But what about those times when it's not just distraction that's holding us back, but a lack of motivation or inspiration? How can the 5-second rule help us tap into our creative energy and unleash our full potential?
Well, that's where the 5-second rule can really shine. It can be a really powerful tool for overcoming creative blocks, igniting inspiration, and pushing ourselves to new heights. The key is to remember that creativity isn't a passive process. It requires action and experimentation, and a willingness to embrace the unknown.
So it's about getting out of our heads and into action.
Exactly. And the 5-second rule can be that push we need to get started,
Yeah.
even when we're feeling stuck or uninspired. The book shares some incredible stories of people who use the rule to unlock their creative potential and achieve extraordinary results. For example, there's the story of Maria, a painter, who was struggling with a creative block. She'd been staring at a blank canvas for days, feeling completely uninspired.
Oh, I've been there. It's like that creative well has run dry. So how did Maria use the 5-second rule to get her creative juices flowing again?
Well, she decided to try a new approach. Instead of waiting for inspiration to strike, she used the 5-second rule to push herself into action. She picked up a paintbrush, started counting backwards from 5, and at once she simply started painting.
That's so simple, yet so powerful. It's about taking that first step even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. And what happened next is amazing. As Maria started painting, she felt her creativity start to flow again. She wasn't worried about perfection or outcome. She was simply enjoying the process of creation. And in that state of flow, she created one of her most beautiful and inspiring paintings.
That's incredible. It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to overcome a creative block is to just get out of our own way and let our creativity flow through us.
Exactly. And the 5-second rule can be that gentle nudge we need to step out of our comfort zones and unleash our creative potential.
Okay, so we've explored how the 5-second rule can enhance our decision-making, our communication, our productivity, and even our creativity. But are there any situations where the rule might not be applicable or even counterproductive?
That's a great question. While the 5-second rule can be a powerful tool, it's important to use it wisely and to discern when it's appropriate and when other approaches might be more effective. For example, if you're facing a complex decision, that requires a lot of careful consideration and analysis. Rushing into a decision based solely on your gut instinct might not be the best approach.
So it's about finding the right balance between intuition and deliberate thought.
Exactly. And the source material also emphasizes the importance of being mindful of our emotional state when using the rule. If we're feeling highly emotional or overwhelmed, it might be wise to pause, take a step back, and allow ourselves time to process our feelings before making any decisions.
That's a crucial point. It's about recognizing that the 5-second rule isn't a magic bullet, but rather a tool that can be used in conjunction with other strategies for navigating life's challenges. But are there any other potential pitfalls or limitations to consider?
Another important consideration is to avoid using the 5-second rule to suppress or dismiss our emotions. While the countdown can be really helpful for interrupting negative thought patterns, it's important to acknowledge and process our feelings, rather than simply trying to push them away.
So it's not about denying our emotions, but rather about using the rule as a tool for managing those emotions in a healthy way.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between acknowledging our feelings and taking action in spite of those feelings. And it's about recognizing that sometimes the most courageous act is to simply sit with our discomfort and allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling.
That's a great reminder. It's about using the 5-second rule as a tool for empowerment, not avoidance. But how do we know when we've truly integrated the 5-second rule into our lives? What does that look like?
Well, the beauty of the 5-second rule is that it's not about achieving some external measure of success or mastery. It's about cultivating an internal state of courage, confidence, and self-awareness. As we practice using the rule, we start to notice subtle shifts in our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. We might find ourselves hesitating less, taking more risks, and showing up more fully in our lives.
So it's about those small incremental changes that add up to a more fulfilling and authentic life.
Exactly. And those changes might not always be visible to others, but we'll feel the difference within ourselves. We'll experience a greater sense of agency, a deeper connection to our passions, and a renewed sense of purpose.
That's such a beautiful vision. It's about embracing the journey and trusting that the 5-second rule will continue to guide us towards our highest potential. But I'm curious, what's the most common misconception that you hear people have about the 5-second rule?
One of the biggest misconceptions is that the 5-second rule is simply about willpower or forcing ourselves to do things we don't want to do. But it's actually quite the opposite. The rule is about tapping into our intrinsic motivation, our inner wisdom, and our deepest desires. It's about aligning our actions with our values and creating a life that feels authentic and meaningful.
So it's not about forcing ourselves into a mold, but rather about unleashing our true selves.
Exactly. And the source material really emphasizes the importance of self-compassion and grace throughout this process. It's not about being perfect or getting it right every time. It's about showing up for ourselves even when we stumble, and trusting that every experience, both positive and negative, is an opportunity for growth and learning.
That's such an important reminder. It's about embracing the journey and trusting that we're exactly where we need to be. But what final piece of wisdom would you offer to listeners who are eager to integrate the 5-second rule into their own lives?
The most powerful advice I can offer is this: start small. Don't try to overhaul your entire life overnight. Choose one area where you want to make a change, whether it's overcoming procrastination, improving your communication, or pursuing a passion. And just start incorporating the 5-second rule into that area.
So it's about setting realistic goals and building momentum gradually.
Exactly. And remember, the 5-second rule is a tool, not a magic wand. It's about cultivating the inner strength, courage, and self-awareness to create the life we truly desire.
That's a beautiful message to end on. We've covered so much ground in this part of our deep dive, from decision-making to communication to productivity and creativity. We've explored the nuances of the 5-second rule, the potential pitfalls to avoid, and the incredible transformative power of this simple yet profound tool.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to shift our focus to the bigger picture. We're going to explore how the 5-second rule can help us create a life that is not just successful, but also meaningful, joyful, and aligned with our deepest values.
Welcome back to our final segment on the 5-second rule. So we've talked about how it can help us in our day-to-day lives, but I think what's most intriguing is how it ties into this bigger idea of living a fulfilling life. What were some of the insights you got from the book about this?
Well, one thing that really stood out to me was how the source material redefines what a great life actually means. It's not about, chasing some external definition of success, but rather about living in alignment with your values, pursuing your passions, and having the courage to be your authentic self.
It's about defining success on your own terms, right? Not by society standards, but by what truly matters to you.
Exactly. And that takes courage, because it often means going against the grain, challenging the status quo, and taking risks that others might not understand. The 5-second rule can be that inner nudge, that burst of courage that propels you forward when those doubts and fears start creeping in.
So it's about trusting your inner compass and having the courage to follow where it leads, even if it takes you off the beaten path. But what about those times when we feel lost or unsure of our direction? How can the 5-second rule help us navigate those moments of uncertainty?
That's where the rule's power to interrupt those negative thought patterns becomes really crucial. When you feel lost or uncertain, it's easy to spiral into self-doubt and inaction. The 5-second rule can help you break free from that paralysis and start taking small steps forward, even if you don't have all the answers.
So it's about taking action even in the face of uncertainty, trusting that the path will reveal itself as you go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the source material gives some really great examples of this. Remember Jessica, who felt stuck in a dead-end job, but had no idea what she wanted to do instead?
Oh yeah, her story really resonated with me because I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of being trapped in a career that's no longer fulfilling. So how did Jessica use the 5-second rule to break free from that rut?
Well, she started by identifying those moments when she felt a spark of joy or excitement, even if they seemed totally unrelated to her work. She loved baking, for example, and she realized she felt most alive when she was experimenting in the kitchen.
So she was paying attention to those subtle cues, those little moments of joy that were trying to guide her.
Yes, and instead of dismissing them as just hobbies, she started asking herself, what if? What if she could turn her passion for baking into something more?
I love that. It's about giving ourselves permission to dream and explore those possibilities, even if they seem a little bit scary or unrealistic at first.
Exactly. And that's where the 5-second rule came in for Jessica. When she felt those doubts creeping in, thoughts like, I'm too old to start a new career, or I'll never be successful as a baker, she would use the countdown to interrupt those negative thought patterns and take action.
So she was using the rule to shift from a mindset of fear and limitation to a mindset of possibility and action.
Precisely. She started small, taking baking classes, experimenting with new recipes, sharing her creations with friends and family, and gradually her confidence grew and she started to see a path forward.
That's so inspiring. It shows that it's never too late to pursue our passions and create a life that feels More aligned with who we truly are.
It is, and it all started with those small, courageous steps fueled by the 5-second rule.
Okay, so we've talked about finding our passions and having the courage to pursue them. But what about those times when life throws us a curveball? How can the 5-second rule help us navigate those unexpected challenges and setbacks that inevitably come our way?
That's where the rule's emphasis on resilience and adaptability really comes in. Life is full of ups and downs. And it's not about avoiding those challenges, but about developing the inner strength to navigate them with grace and resilience. The 5-second rule can help us shift from a victim mindset, where we feel powerless and overwhelmed, to a growth mindset, where we see challenges as opportunities for learning and growth.
So it's about reframing those challenges as opportunities, rather than seeing them as roadblocks.
Exactly. And the source material tells a great story about this. Remember Michael, who faced a really devastating setback? When he was diagnosed with a serious illness, he was understandably scared and angry. But instead of letting those emotions consume him, he used the 5-second rule to shift his perspective.
It's incredible that he was able to find that strength in such a difficult time. How did he apply the rule in that situation?
So every time he felt himself spiraling into negativity and despair, he would start the countdown. It helped him to interrupt those thought patterns and focus on what he could control: his attitude, his choices, and his commitment to his recovery.
That's such a powerful example of how the 5-second rule can help us reclaim our agency, even in the face of circumstances that feel beyond our control.
It is. And Michael's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the challenges he faced, he was able to find meaning and purpose in his experience, and even use his journey to inspire others.
That's so inspiring. It shows that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose hope, resilience, and growth. But what about those times when we feel like we've made a mistake or failed to live up to our own expectations? How can the 5-second rule help us navigate those feelings of guilt and shame and self-criticism?
Well, that's where the rule's emphasis on self-compassion and grace really comes in. We all make mistakes. And it's not about being perfect, but about learning from those experiences and moving forward with greater wisdom and understanding. The 5-second rule can help us interrupt those negative self-talk patterns and cultivate a more forgiving and compassionate inner dialogue.
So it's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer a friend who is struggling.
Exactly. And a book highlights a good example of this. Remember Lisa, who was really struggling with feelings of guilt and self-recrimination. After making a mistake at work that had significant consequences, she was beating herself up, replaying the scenario over and over in her head, and just feeling like a complete failure.
Oh, I've been there. It's so easy to get caught in that cycle of self-blame and shame. So how did Lisa use the 5-second rule to break free from those negative thought patterns?
So she realized that her self-criticism wasn't serving her at all. It was only making her feel worse and preventing her from moving forward. So she started using the 5-second rule to interrupt those negative thoughts and replace them with more compassionate and constructive ones.
So instead of dwelling on the mistake, she was focusing on what she could learn from the experience and how she could prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. She used the countdown to shift her focus from self-blame to problem solving. She asked herself, what can I do to make things right? And what steps can I take to ensure this doesn't happen again?
That's such a powerful shift in perspective. It's about taking responsibility for our actions without getting bogged down in self-criticism.
Exactly. And Lisa's story is a reminder that we all make mistakes. And those mistakes don't define us. They're opportunities for growth, learning, and resilience.
It's about embracing our imperfections and recognizing that we're all works in progress. But how does the 5-second rule fit into this bigger picture of finding meaning and purpose in life? How can it help us live a life that feels truly fulfilling and aligned with our deepest values?
That's a great question. And it's something that I think we all grapple with on some level. The 5-second rule isn't about finding a predetermined path or achieving some external measure of success. It's about cultivating the inner strength, courage, and self-awareness to create a life that feels authentic and meaningful to you.
So it's about defining success on our own terms and having the courage to live a life that reflects our unique values and aspirations.
Exactly. And the 5-second rule can be a powerful tool for navigating that journey. It can help us overcome the fear, the self-doubt, the limiting beliefs that often hold us back from living a life that is true to ourselves. It can help us tap into our intuition, make courageous decisions, and take those leaps of faith that lead to a more fulfilling and purposeful life.
So to wrap up this deep dive into the 5-second rule, It's not just about getting things done. It's about living a life that is aligned with our deepest values and aspirations. It's about having the courage to be ourselves, to pursue our passions, and to make a difference in the world. It's about recognizing that we have the power to create the life we want, one 5-second decision at a time. If you could achieve anything in your life by simply pushing past your hesitation, what would it be?
Thanks for joining us and